Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the Ninja community. My name is Ashley McCurry. I'm here on behalf of Defendify for regular webinars that we do to increase our cybersecurity resilience together as a community. We're all learning and growing and kind of getting more protected in our businesses and our communities. We're so glad to have you here today for this month's webinar, where we're joined with Kurtis Minder. I'll say hello to you, Kurtis, before I do your intro. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you? Thanks for having me.
We were laughing a little bit right before the tech check, so it was very fun to get back into professional career and time to talk about Kurtis. Kurtis is the author of a book called Cyber Recon, My Life in Cyber Espionage. I loved it. I read it a few weeks ago. He was the co-founder and CEO of GroupSense, where he led a team of world-class analysts and technologists providing custom cybersecurity intelligence to some of the globe's top brands. He has more than 20 years of experiences in roles spanning operations, design, and business development at companies like Mirage Networks and Cayman Systems. And ultimately, he is the author of the book, like I just talked about. He is a professional ransomware negotiator, the best that we've ever met, the best in the business, and a very popular webinar guest. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're glad that you're here to welcome the Ninja community, which is a partner of Defendify's. And so we're really excited to partner with the Ninja crowd. Most of these folks might be new to our webinar, so just some housekeeping. Folks, let us know in the chat in the right. If you have any questions, say hello, tell us where you're coming in from. Ultimately, it's a community, so if you have any questions and if you know the answers to the questions, sometimes we have folks in the chat sort of have a discussion. But first, I'll start with you, Kurtis. Tell us a little bit about where you got your start in ransomware negotiation and how that brings you to authoring a book about it.
Yeah, thank you. I started the business about 12 years ago, and we really didn't get into the ransomware response work until about halfway through. We had built a reputation because the focus of the business was cyber espionage, which is quite literally spying on the hackers on behalf of enterprises and governments. And I can talk about why we do that. What's that? Criminal hackers. Thank you for making that designation, because in the InfoSec community, hacker is not necessarily a derogatory term, but the criminal hackers are, as I like to call them, threat actors. So we were spying on them for our customers, and we got a reputation for being the company you call if you have to talk to the bad guy about something. And usually that's because someone, let's say a bad guy's on a dark website and they're trying to sell some stolen data that they've hacked the company and they stole some information. They're trying to monetize that. They're trying to sell it. Okay. We would have sort of a clandestine agent on that, almost like spy versus spy on that forum. And we would engage with the bad guy and get them to tell us information about that or give us samples of the data just so we could see if it was real and things like that. So it was sort of, almost like a real espionage operation. That reputation got us pulled into the ransomware response business when companies all of a sudden are getting hit with these ransomware attacks and they need to talk to the bad guys. And it sort of snowballed on us. We started small, but very quickly we became one of the top response firms in the country. And I got personally well known for the negotiation component of that, where we're actually negotiating to lower the ransom price.
Well, and it's fascinating because when I picture you saying this, it's a hooded, dark room, basement hackers, criminal hackers, and they're typing away very quickly on 47 screens, and they're all having different conversations and trying to get our data from all the small businesses of America. That's very dramatic and possibly. Yeah. But you've kind of hinted that criminal hackers have actual jobs, and it's their job that they go into. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, especially the ransomware operators. Typically, these guys are located in a country that has offered them some kind of amnesty for their behavior. So Russia, for example, maybe 80+% of them are based in either Russia or a Russia-friendly country like Belarus, Moldova, or like the Crimea area of Ukraine. And so they're not going to get arrested, right? So they're actually operating almost like a business. The people that work there are actual employees of an organization. They get paychecks, they have quotas, they have bonuses, they have office politics and middle management, everything that you would think from a normal company, but it's just that their business is extorting Western enterprises.
Gosh, what do the resumes look like on that?
Yeah.
That wasn't a proposed
You
question. I'm
joke,
just
you joke,
curious.
but they actually do post job positions and things like that on these bulletin boards on the dark web.
Tell me more about this. Now, a little bit that I do remember in your book, I remember a lot of your book, but one little aspect of the dark web that I do remember is the marketplace systems that you had written about, that there were pretty intricate, excuse me, today, into very
Interesting.
well managed. Thank you. To be fair, English is not my first language, but and 25 years in, so I have no excuses at least. The marketplaces that they set up actually are not just like Craigslist in the 90s, the way that I picture it. It is actually, there are vetted financial systems. There is a little bit of like reputation that needs to be built before you get into the marketplaces. There's some ways to prove that you are who you say you are in these marketplaces, along with your profiles and kind of vetting process of the profiles that can log into the marketplaces. There, I caught my words.
Yeah.
In the sense of the marketplaces in the dark web, can you talk to me a little bit about what that looks like for someone who hasn't read the book?
Yeah, I'll talk about what it looks like quite literally and then sort of metaphorically. But basically, like you said, these do not look like, some fly by night operation. They're not. They look like eBay. They look like Amazon. So when you log into them, they have avatars. They, like you said, they have reputational systems. They have an escrow system. And it's very much trust based. Many of them require quite a bit of vetting to get into in the first place, so that they're relatively certain you're a criminal, and they feel fairly safe transacting out in the open in these forums. And there are hundreds of these, and there's different focuses. Some focus on drugs, some focus on stolen identities, so making fake licenses and passports and things like that. And then there are some that quite literally just focus on selling stolen systems access from Western country or companies. So that would look like, we call those initial access brokers, but what they effectively do is they'll exploit some vulnerability or get somebody to click on something they shouldn't click on. And that'll get them access to that person's computer, and then subsequently the systems around them. And once they've sort of determined they've got what we would call persistent access, meaning they can reliably get in, you don't know they're there, they then go onto this marketplace and sell that access to other bad guys. And the advertisements are they're sort of obfuscated. So they won't say, I broke into company A. They'll say, I have persistent domain level admin access at a US manufacturer based in Kansas with 10,000 employees and $1 billion in revenue. So they give you kind of the metadata, if you will, about the company. And then the buyers will buy that. And often the people who do acquire it are the ransomware actors. And that's who they're typically selling these to. But there's all of these different layers in the marketplaces.
For sure. I find that so interesting. And one more question about the book. As a person who has done some fundraising research and has done some nonprofit donor research in my past careers, and quite frankly, has to do some influencer research on people like you, as I'm finding you to bring to the Ninjio community and the Defendify community, what sort of process has to go into building an online profile in these dark web spaces so that you can look like someone who's supposed to be in those places instead of looking like someone who's lurking or researching in those places? You do outline it in the book, but I'd love to hear about it here in the community.
Yeah, and disclaimer, I don't recommend anyone actually do this.
Oh, yeah, I didn't mean it that way. I'm like, tell me how.
Yeah.
No, that's how I meant it.
So it has evolved over the years, like you would expect. The technology's evolved, the places that the bad guys operate evolved, and the stakes are a lot higher now, right? So it is fairly complex and takes frankly a lot of time, but like human time, to get this built. But you effectively want to build a persona, or what we call a sock puppet, or a persona that the bad guys are fairly convinced is one of them. And part of that is speaking their lingo and their language. These folks are operating in, like I said, 80+% in Russia or Ukraine. It's not just speaking the language. The lingo part's also very important. They will recognize right away if you're part of the community based on how you talk, not just that you speak the language, but the words that you use, the slang that you use, things like that. Much of that actually revolves around the gaming community. So a lot of that gaming sort of lingo sort of, transfers over to the cyber crime community as well. On top of that, we mentioned that you have to sort of be vetted to get in. Often, we will vet ourselves. We just at Group Sense, we had personas going back over a decade. So some of them were so tenured, they were already in the important places, and so we were able to vet ourselves. You have to sometimes do an illegal transaction in a kind of a public way. We will transact with ourselves, and so it's theater, but it's convincing, and the bad guys believe you're one of them. And then there's certain like regular behaviors you can't just show up when you want something. You have to show up and participate in the community. And some of that's just joking around, making comments about stuff in the media, things like that, but acting like a real human being that's actually logging into the forum, right?
Yeah.
So it's a lot of work. Yeah. In Group Sense, we had over 4,000 of those. And it was a lot to manage, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah. I'm sure. So a small business who's trying to protect itself probably doesn't have the capacity to spend time building these profiles and going on the dark web and trying to research whether or not their business is sort of being targeted, or even if their data is available on the dark web.
Right.
So I assume they would need dark web monitoring or other tools like that in their business. Okay. So are there any advice for a business that actually doesn't have the capacity to be as professional as a ransomware negotiator who's sort of building a profile on the dark web? Which, by the way, if folks do want to learn more, we are giving away 20 of your books. So if you're interested in winning one of those books, just make a little effort to comment at some point in the webinar, whether you're just saying hello
nice
or
comments.
Or whatever. No, we don't have to regulate free speech. We can make any comments that we would like. And I'll use your name as part of a raffle to raffle off 20 books. But before I forget, I will have to email you and ask you for your address to make sure we can mail the book. So before anyone thinks it's spam, if you comment here and you get an email from Ashley at Defendify asking for your address, that's not spam. It's me. It's really me. It's a real person. But aside from that, if someone doesn't have the ability to be monitoring their own systems, monitoring for their own business, monitoring the dark web for their own data, what are some steps that a business or an organization can take to start protecting themselves to lower the likelihood that they'll be attacked? I know it can't be 100%, but to kind of increase their protection and lower their likelihood that they'll be one of the victims of us criminal hacker and need to call you.
I think one of the cool side effects, there's not very many positives to doing this for a living. It's pretty depressing a lot of times. But one of the positives is at the end of each one of these cases, the ransomware cases, we typically have sort of taken inventory of how the bad guys got in, right? And how they pivoted and so that gives us a pretty nice picture of like what you're asking for, like, well, what can organizations do to not be a victim? I think, there's some pretty standard stuff. I think some of the people roll their eyes, but I mean, good credential and password policy is super important. Multi-factor authentication wherever you possibly can. I think from a organizational standpoint, having a pretty tight control over access for the individual. So like what we refer to as like zero trust or least privilege access is super important. And also, the stuff that Ninja does, the bad guys exploit human behavior. So training people on how to see that, how to identify those things. They might say, for example, that they're going to mail you a free book and they're just I'm just kidding. But yeah, so I mean,
now no one's going to respond.
User training is super important. The employee training part is super important, and unfortunately, a lot of companies miss that. It may be one of the most important aspects, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes. Okay. So you have seen folks go through the process and they've called you in. And I know you normally get called in on bigger businesses that already have a law firm working with them. But can you talk to us about when they call someone like you? what are the steps, and do they have to engage in those steps would also be interesting. So you walk in the room to a business event, guys, they've already been hacked. The message came out on the printer saying they've been hacked. Now what?
So first, let me just put a small little clarification in there. Yes, at Group Sense, and I'm no longer at Group Sense, but when I was there, the cases were brought to us by usually law firms or cyber insurance companies. So the profile of the client was pretty large. That said, I still do, and started a nonprofit and did quite a bit of pro bono work for the small business community. So I've been involved in the entire spectrum of this thing. I've seen, anything from a Fortune 500 all the way down to, a small accounting firm in middle America or something. So I have a pretty good idea of everybody's experience. And obviously that experience varies based on the organization and the size of the organization. I think more relevant for this audience, the non-Fortune 500 folks, so first of all, if they get the ransom note, hopefully, if this happens to someone on the call, do not follow the instructions on the ransom note, because the ransom note will basically try to get you to log into the dark web. It'll give you very specific instructions on how to do that. It's not that difficult, and to talk to the bad guys. And my suggestion to anyone on this webinar would be, do not do that until you have a plan. And usually you're going to want to have a professional involved to help you through that if you decide to. So you
immediately shut off your computer?
What's that?
Do you immediately shut off your computer?
No, that's also a great question. So unfortunately, the bad guy's software that locks all of the files in the ransomware, and that's what it does. It basically encrypts all of your files with a key that the bad guys have, but you don't. And that makes your machine inoperable. I know we've all been trained when the machine's acting funny to reboot it, but that has some negative side effects. The bad guy's software is not super stable. And so there's a possibility that your computer will never recover if you reboot it after the ransomware attack. The other thing is, if we're going to do any kind of technical response or forensics on this, like an incident response firm would do, that also erases a lot of evidence in memory. So you really don't want to do that. You want to contact a proper responder or your managed IT company and have them help you take those next steps. To your other part of the question, do they have to? No, they don't have to engage, and that's a very big decision point. That a lot of companies struggle with. I just did a talk. I was at the B-side, South Florida, and I debuted some research that I did with a gentleman named Paul Marinan. And Paul's a great security researcher, mostly in the cryptocurrency space. But what we were able to do was tie ransom payments to military activity on behalf of Russia against Ukraine. So for a long time, we thought that these bad guys were just buying fancy watches and going to the club in St. Petersburg and popping bottles behind the VIP rope, which that's also happening. But we now can show quantitatively that some of this money is actually going to military activity, which would be harming human beings. So one of the first questions that I ask, and I think some people think this is silly, but I think it very seriously, and that is, is it against your values to pay a ransom? And your values could be very broad. They could be they could be very specific. Like could say we're not paying bad guys. That could be a value. But more likely they're broad. And one thing I would expect a lot of companies to say, look, we're not going to do anything that harms another human being. Or if you're a hospital or a medical facility, you subscribe to the Hippocratic Oath, which is first, do no harm. And, I asked that question up front is look, if you run a values-based organization and the first time it is inconvenient for you to honor those values, you toss them aside, they will never be worth anything again, right? And so this is a moment that you really need to test those things. That's a tough one. The other gate is it illegal? In the US, it's typically not illegal to pay a ransom like this unless the threat actor is on a sanctions list from the Treasury Department. So that's what the response team will help figure out. Are these guys sanctioned? If they're not sanctioned, it's not illegal to make a payment. And the next part would be a very complex sort of business math question, right? And really, one of the things I help the organizations get through those questions and work through that equation, if you will. But we don't just want to say, yes, we're going to make a payment. Kurtis, call them and get it down to close to zero as possible and call us back. We really need to understand what is a reasonable number, almost like a budget, that we're willing to pay.
How do you figure out that math? Is it just what you have in your bank account, or is it like a percentage of the business, or is there maybe a anecdote that you have where somebody had to figure out that math? I
Yeah,
remember
I mean,
cancer charity.
it happens almost every single case. It is complex, and it's imperfect, right? Most companies have a rough idea of what it costs them to not operate, like to not ship product, to not invoice. So I think my value, or the responder's value, is really to help them think about the other things that they're not thinking about immediately. And I call that the ransomware blast radius, by the way. So there's like, the operational impact is obvious, but there are concentric circles around that you don't think about, that are sometimes longer term and frankly could be more expensive. So like, for example, what if you can't make payroll for a couple of weeks? What does that do to morale, attrition? What did it cost to hire and train the people that left because you didn't pay them? And so there's a bunch of stuff to think about there that make it a hard equation, but it's doable. It takes time though.
Holy, I love talking with you. You're my favorite webinar guest. I say it all the time. I've said it at another webinar that there's like a true crime vibe to this stuff. I think people are really interested in the back alley, like what is actually happening. We see TV shows where there's a hacker and breach, and the video comes out, and then to get to the opportunity to talk to a real person who has done this work in a calm way. One thing you've said in the past is you have to act almost like a therapist for the folks that are the victims. And I love that concept, because I assume around all the technical stuff, around all the dark web, around all the technical controls, what could have been done, what should have been done, whatever, there's a human whose business is on the line. And they must have opinions on how you handle that. They must feel freaked out, maybe, or scared. They might feel angry. Who knows? Like, what's the process there? And then you come in with a calm voice and say, hey, I've done this 100 times before. Let me guide you through this. I mean, that must be an interesting perspective. If the dark interactions, the fact that you're always the one in an emergency situation, doesn't get you down, it must have like a do-gooder, like I'm doing good for humanity feeling in that work. But I don't know. So what's it like interacting with the actual victims?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, well, to your point, when I come in with my calm demeanor, I think the thing that brings, to the table isn't necessarily my jazz radio voice. It's people don't like uncertainty, and this is very opaque to them. They don't. So just by me explaining to them in plain terms what is actually happening, who is this person that is doing this to them, why that person's doing it, and that I've done these before, and these are the kinds of things we should expect going forward. Just that little bit of information helps people calm down. And even if it's not a good outlook, just for them to understand the mechanics of it, it really helps the human brain kind of chill out a minute. And so that, we usually start there. But yes, I end up, say, like, sometimes a therapist, and often there's multiple people on these calls, but it's not uncommon for the CEO to call me directly from their car, after one of these calls, and ask questions that they were embarrassed to ask in front of the other people, or stuff like that. That happens quite a bit. And sometimes it's because the bad guys do. So one thing that we didn't clarify at the beginning is, they're obviously locking the files, so you can't use your computers, and your email doesn't work. A lot of times they can stop your phones from working. I've had cases where they actually somehow locked the HVAC system, so the air conditioning and heating doesn't work, and stuff like that. So these guys are getting fairly good at the operations interruption part. But before they do that, they typically steal as much of the data as they can from your network real quietly and sneak it out. So they're smart also about, understanding the data sets that they have. I think they use Gen AI for some of that, and we can come back to that a little bit. But basically, now you can imagine, if you're a CEO, starting to go through your head, like, well, what is our data? Of course, it's going to be HR records and personal information of our employees, probably contracts with our vendors, intellectual property. I just did one for an airplane's manufacturer. They manufacture parts to airplanes, and some of those are pretty critical intellectual property components that they wouldn't necessarily want, for example, China getting a hold of or something like that. But also, like, over time, you might, as you're kind of inventorying, what do they have of ours? If you, for example, knew that they had all of your mailboxes of all of your mail, you think there might be something in there that you don't want them to have? And I can talk about how that comes into play later from subsequent attacks. But like, there's like, I'm a super nice guy. I think it's a subjective opinion, but I think I'm a nice guy. But if you had all of my emails going back 10 years, I bet you could find an email or two in there out of context that makes me look like a real jerk that I wouldn't want out in the public, right? And so when you're a public CEO, or you've got sort of a personal brand to worry about, those things start to come into play. Yeah, it's very emotional.
Yeah, for sure. Are folks that get breached, are businesses surprised generally, or do they all think they're covered? And I assume everybody either is fully covered with all of the cybersecurity tools in order to run a business, or they know they're not covered and they just don't know what they need to do to be covered, right? And so where do your victims, and I hate using that term, but where do the victims tend to lie?
It's actually almost like a third category, which is they don't believe that this is, a lot of them don't, on the smaller side, the small, medium business side, they don't believe that it's going to happen to them. Right. So they don't prioritize their cybersecurity investments. And so this is a very expensive lesson. Because quite literally, if you have a bank account, you're connected to the internet, you're basically a candidate for this kind of thing. And you should prepare for it.
Which is something that they do cover in Ninja videos. They do talk about this in Ninja videos as well. Good. So that's good. That's good. So a little Ninja plug accidentally. I haven't even looked at our proposed questions, not once. So I'm going to look at that, see if we can pretend to be on script for 1 second. There is a question about any ransomware cases that stand out to you and what you learned from it. Do you have anything top of mind that doesn't give away company information, but sort of anecdotally talks about anything that stands out, particularly to the audience of IT leaders and businesses that are a little bit protected in various capacities here that we have today?
I mean, there's so many different, there's so many of them that, it's hard to pick one, but let me think about that. While I think about it, I'm going to multitask. I'll say, like, generally, I think what I've recognized is the organizations that have a response plan fare much better every time. So I think as a small business, you might think it's a little bit over the top to have a cyber incident response plan. I'd say no, it isn't. No matter how small you are, I think it is a worthwhile exercise. And I've seen the difference between organizations that do and the ones that don't. And even bonus points if you've done some practicing of that plan, right? Because you can buy all the tools in the world, you can train your employees and things like that. But sometimes these things just happen, not by any fault of the organization. Maybe it's a software supplier that's failed, right? So we've had ransomware attacks where the bad guys hacked into the software supplier and then got into all the customers through that, right? So how do you defend yourself against that? So you should plan for this, regardless of what your investments are on the defense side. But we've had organizations. So I'll tie one to the story I just talked about with the email boxes. It was a fairly large software company. We were negotiating on behalf of their law firm. Multinational company, and we were getting close to where we were going to or sort of come to an agreement with the bad guy. It was within the budget that we had talked about at the beginning, and the CEO of the company called me. I was like on a Saturday afternoon. And he had received a message from the threat actors referencing content in his mailbox that, let's just say, would compromise him on a personal level. Now, put yourself in my shoes for a second. Like, I'm representing the company on behalf of the law firm, and he's calling me up and saying, I think we need to pay them more. So this doesn't ruin my life. And but these are things you have to think about. I like to use the word attack surface. Your communications data is technically your attack surface. That is leverage. And so, maybe unless you're legally required, don't keep 10 years of that stuff. Right?
Yeah.
So that's one. I mean, I have a million stories, but that's one that I remember being fairly difficult to navigate. Ultimately, I ended up, disclosing this to the law firm, and we worked through it with him. But yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking of the email that I keep all my junk email from college with my maiden name. I'm like, okay, delete some of that stuff. Okay. Ooh. Well, that sounds like you have to be in and around awkward and challenging conversations constantly. You're either telling people they should have done something differently, or they have to do something hard, or they have to kind of spend money or be vulnerable, or they have to make ethical decisions, in a way that they might not have realized, put their money in where their mouth is type ethical decisions. None of that sounds very pleasant.
So it's emotionally taxing. I'm not going to lie.
I assume, and not a proposed question, and I know the answer to it, but what are some of the things that you do to blow off steam? And I'm hoping you bring up your very cool biking hobby. And I don't mean cycling.
You've got bicycles behind you. I have motorcycle helmets behind me.
Yeah.
I also ride bicycles. Okay.
I wasn't plugging it, but I do know that you do the bike stuff. Not Harley. I don't know why I said Harley. It came out of my mouth. But I know
you know what's crazy is I've been riding motorcycles for over 30 years, and I've never ridden a Harley Davidson.
Never ridden one at all? Like, never even tried?
Oh, no, nobody's ever offered. I've just
ridden a Harley.
Yeah. Nope, I haven't.
Don't you have it? Dads ride Harley. You got to ride Harley with the Okay, fair enough. Okay.
I think I do a good job of, and by the way, keep in mind, so it's not all about me. My team does this work. We have the analysts and the researchers that maintain those 4,000 personas. We had programs, mental health programs for those people, because you can imagine that if you spend your whole day pretending to be a bad guy in the darkest place on the internet every day, that's not great. That's not a great. It sounds exciting.
Like, that sounds awesome. Oh, you're like, no, that's not great. No, my whole face changed.
It's just the worst. And so
I was like, ooh.
So I've always been somewhat, sort of tuned into the mental health stuff, and I've got a lot of good personal habits. I wake up early. I go to the gym. I write in a journal every day. I got this cool journal. This thing cool looking. I write in a journal every day, and I see a therapist. Right. I think there's nothing shameful about that. I think that's a part of just health maintenance. And but then I also have hobbies. I ride motorcycles. I have 6 of them, and I hike, and I trail run. I mountain bike. I do all kinds of neat stuff. But I live in Colorado, so that's.
I never pictured what a ransomware negotiator would do or talk like or look like. And so I never pictured it before, but now I have a vision of a modern man who is changing the world with ransomware negotiations, writing books, and honestly helping us all learn about the back end of the dark web and what happens, because you hear about it and you see it, and then you're over here seemingly normal person navigating these discussions with us. And
all relative, I guess. Yeah.
It's all relative. You definitely don't have a normal job. I saw a comment in the chat that said, the more I learn about cybersecurity, the more I feel like I don't know much. And isn't that the way everyone feels about cybersecurity? Every single person that I've ever talked to is like, wow, the more books I read, the more I'm like, Yikes. And I think that really, really, really highlights one, thank you for being here. Whoever made that comment, we're glad you're here. We all feel the same way. That's why we're doing these. But on the flip side is that's why it is so important to share this knowledge and to have people like you take the time to step up and say, hey, this is how it works. You don't need to know all this, but you might need to have someone on your team that
Yeah.
knows all this, or you might need to have a company on your side that does some of the things that will help you so you don't have to do this. I assume, somebody says there seems to be no such thing as secure unless you live in a cave. Well, can't recommend that. There's probably not enough caves for all of us. But you did have some suggestions on how to keep your company secure and other companies secure. Let me make sure. And folks, just a reminder, if you do have questions about anything that Kurtis is saying, still pop it in the chat. We are looking at it. And quite frankly, when I looked at our questions, we're naturally answering them. So we didn't fall off track. We're still on script, and I appreciate it. How do attackers research and pick their targets? This one's my favorite. I assume only big businesses would be the ones attacked because they'd have the most money. But then
Right.
I hear that they're the ones with teams that are, maybe they have a 40 person a 40-person cybersecurity team. That would be amazing, I'm sure, for a big company. What about normal sized companies? Most of America is small and medium sized businesses. How are the bad guys picking that business versus that business versus that business?
Sure. Just going back to the sort of the beginning of the webinar, when I talked about how these folks operate as like a business, you can also look at the sort of victims that they pick or the targets that they pick as their go-to-market strategy, right? So some of them are sort of opportunistic. They're scanning the internet and looking for a particular vulnerability, and just whoever they hit, they hit. There are other groups that are what we call big game hunters. They will spend months just trying to break into General Electric because they know General Electric will pay them $50 million to go away, right? So it's like, they're placing big bets. But most of this is opportunistic. There's a couple of the ransomware groups now that have gotten somewhat clever, and I mentioned sort of the software supplier angle, and they've realized that they get more bang for their buck by attacking the software supplier. Someone who has they're basically sending updates into their software or something like that, which is most of your software providers these days. Some kind of updates coming into your systems, and they will attack that company and embed themselves in the update. And what happens is they've attacked one company and they've gotten access to 500, right, or 1,000. And so there's a couple groups that have been focused almost exclusively on that and having some success with that, unfortunately, going through the software supply chain.
I don't love that. I don't love that at all. I also, one other thing that you mentioned is sometimes folks might choose on a vertical. So like if the industry of car dealerships get hacked, now like hackers are noticing that that's like other car dealerships might have the same thing that happened last year. So it's on my mind. But if they see that a software in a car dealership, then maybe other car dealerships use the same software. So, industry specific attacks seem also to be the case. But I assume at this point, every industry, someone has been attacked in every industry.
Sure.
At this point, I assume there's no.
When you see that on the news, that it looks like, I don't know, trucking and logistics are under attack or something like that. It's not that necessarily that the bad guys woke up one day and said, hey, we can make a bunch of money if we attack these trucking companies. But they have opportunistically attacked a trucking software supplier, right? Okay. Somebody who handles the calculation of the loads or something like that. And they, in their data, have all of the trucking companies. And they'll draft off that data, if you will. And it looks vertical focused. It's really just also opportunistic. It's typically what it is. Now there are bad guys that focus on very specific industries too. Residia for a long time was really focused on healthcare. I just can't imagine how they justify that to themselves, but they were just attacking healthcare institutions and things like that. So there's some that are very much vertically focused.
We recently had a webinar with a healthcare, the Internet of Medical Devices, talking about how, each bed at a hospital could have 15, different things that are attacked. So each person can have 15 things that are subject to attack. And the reason they attack some of the healthcare is because there's not a lot of regulation on the healthcare machines. And because there's not a lot of regulation on the healthcare machines and they get older, and rural communities have healthcare machines that are imaging software.
They don't update the software because it's not available anymore.
Yeah. So didn't love that webinar. Stressed me
No.
out totally. Considered new career moves, but here I am still with my nervousness listening to all of you tell me about all the horrors in the world. But it does feel comforting knowing that intelligent, hardworking people like yourselves are doing this work and doing the work of educating, not only the NGO community here, the Defendify community. Obviously, these webinars go public. We want everyone to get better. That's the goal.
Yeah.
That's
it is important to give back. And that's part of the reason why I do the nonprofit and pro bono work is I believe that you get from the universe what you put into it. And so I just happen to be lucky enough to know a lot about how bad guys operate. So I've been sharing that as much as I can.
It's either going to make you a great conversationalist at parties or a great webinar guest, either one. I'm getting a couple questions on my end about incident response. I know we talked about it. Let's go back to it for a little bit. Someone is saying, great point on having an incident response plan. I feel like we should all have a built-in disaster recovery plans. Otherwise, someone is going to react emotionally, not calmly. I would be that someone, just before we shame anybody, that I would have an emotion first. What actually makes a strong incident response plan? What should people be doing if they're starting from scratch?
Right. I mean, there are some good templates out there.
We have a template.
Yeah. So there's some decent templates out there. I'd say start with that, but you definitely want to make it your own. You need to make it specific to your organization. I think, before you start really digging in beyond the template level, you need to understand from your team kind of what the impacts of different systems are, like if the system's offline or that system's offline, or if everything's offline, and what the impact that would have to your ability to operate. Are there, like, one of the companies it was actually the one I mentioned earlier, was the aircraft parts manufacturer. One of the things that kind of saved them was that they were using slide rules for a lot of their designs and stuff. So they had paper. They had a lot of paper, and the paper kind of saved them. And sometimes that happens in healthcare too. They have their EMR system, but they also have filing cabinets with a lot of paper, and they're able to pivot to that. But that can be part of the plan, is to understand, like, look, are there things we can do if everything's inoperable? What can we do to maintain the business? And having that discussion first, and then once you kind of got a rough idea, it doesn't have to be exact, of impact and ability and resiliency, let's call that. Then you need to walk through the plan. And be very specific. The thing that makes the plans good is, everyone knows what they're responsible for, and everybody has a backup and a tertiary. And then once you've gotten through all of the who does what, where, when, in which order, which is kind of the whole point of the plan. Let me just say, it helps to at least have the discussion about some of the big decisions at that point. Like the executive team sit in a room and go, will we ever pay a ransom? Under what circumstances? Right? What amount of money is not fair? Is too much for us. Like, what's our ceiling? That kind of thing. Do that before it happens, and write that stuff down. Like in some meeting minutes or something. Like, hey, here's what we decided. When we were sitting here calmly and the house wasn't on fire, we all agreed that this was the best path. And that's something I recommend you do up front. But once you've got all of that done, like documented, everything's very specific, practice it. So,
how many employees should a company have before they start thinking about an incident response plan?
1.
Oh.
I actually believe that, not to go on a tangent, but I also believe that this is useful to people, individuals in their home, in their family. So I recommend people do it just for their household. So I believe it's very important.
My family I've been in cybersecurity now for 2 years and some months. I came from fundraising, political fundraising. And so because I've been working now in cybersecurity, I have new opinions and new rules on how our family should live. And I don't know if my family would want me to go through the incident response plan activity, but it is the next step, and I would love it. and my family, which already thinks I'm a little bit obsessive over some of the things that I
Sure.
like, would be like, okay, mama, like, okay. Like, so you know what? I think you just set my weekend plans. We're going to
Yeah,
do
well, and for the family side of things, you're not necessarily going to get a ransom, but you might get extorted. You
yeah,
might
our
get
kids
extorted.
extort us all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But sitting down as a family before these things happen, before you're threatened, before you're extorted, before they've stolen some significant amount of money from your bank account somehow, and discussing how you will handle those things as a
Mhm.
family, and the rules, about those things. Like maybe the rules are every phone's down, nobody's talking to anybody until we do this or that. So
Right.
I think that's important to do.
Although if you work in cybersecurity, you don't give your kids phones.
Right.
Right? Like no phones, use a landline. Two strings and two cans, string and two cans. That's all you
Right.
can use. Okay, we do have some questions from our chat here. One of them is, and it just jumped right up on me, so I apologize. One of them is offering to take you for a ride on the Harley
I saw
versus. So I
that.
don't know if you saw that. I didn't realize you could see the chat. You just
Yeah.
commented. So
Oh yeah.
I don't
I've
know.
been counting.
Oh, nice. That's funny. Okay. Are there any strategy ideas to combat the calendar invite phishing? It's bypassing email gateway
Mhm.
protections. I don't know a lot about this, so if this isn't ringing a bell to you, we
Oh
can
no, it
follow up.
is.
Okay.
No, it is. Yeah. So I think there's two things kind of primarily about that. One is the user training. You usually can spot the inconsistencies in those if you really look. Um, the email gateways, I think, will catch up, and figure this out relatively soon. But at the moment, you're really depending on the people to recognize that this is not a real invite by looking at the sender information, etc. Um, the other thing is, I think that the software companies have some responsibility here too, like the vendors, that have the exploitable vulnerabilities, the maybe the calendar company, whoever your calendar through Microsoft or whomever, has some responsibility to protect you from these things, and especially if they caused it, right? If it's exploiting a vulnerability that they didn't catch. And so, but I think the user training is pretty much the only defense at the moment, until the gateways catch up.
Okay. All right. The next person says share the templates. Absolutely. I will throw them in the email. So if you're an attendee or you're registered and you're seeing a recording, yes, of course, we are happy to share all the templates that we have and share the resources page and all of that. Is cyber insurance effective? Oh, didn't vet that one. Is it effective?
Yes, it can be. It can be. I mean, it's a risk transfer like anything else, right? I do think that, well, one, the premiums for most companies are starting to become a little bit unapproachable, but it is an effective tool to mitigating the risk. So yes, I
Okay.
think so. And also one thing that the insurance companies are doing now and I think is a good thing that they're doing now that they didn't used to, like even just a few years ago, you're going to get a cyber insurance policy. Some of the people on the call will recognize this. Your insurance provider underwriter will send you like a questionnaire. And if I was going to summarize it, it says, "Do you do cybers?" And you go, "Yep." And then they go like, "Here's your policy." They don't do that anymore. They're less and less the case. They're actually checking. So they're making a list of things that you have to do as an organization, and they need you to provide some proof that you're doing those things. And I think that's helping sort of force some cyber hygiene behavior.
Yep, for sure. And the vendors, if vendors want to work with you and they're saying, hey, do you do this or do that?
Right.
That's certainly something that we see as well. Kelly says, how often do the bad actors hold to their side of the bargain when paid? That's a great question.
Mm-hmm. Most of the time,
Okay.
99.9% of the time.
That's way higher than I thought. Way higher than I thought.
Yeah.
I wonder
Well,
what's in it for them.
the fine print is, that they, for example, the software that they give you to unencrypt those files might be buggy or slow, but it typically works, and they'll even provide tech support, when you have issues with it, which is, I mean, literally tech support. They'll get on the
Yeah.
phone with you and walk you through. uh,
Oh,
they've got a reputation as well that they're trying to maintain. If people knew that, you know, um, if you pay Lockbit didn't honor the ransom, nobody pay Lockbit, right? It's that kind of thing. So they have like a little bit of an honor system. Yeah.
That makes sense to me in my brain. That makes sense. Bad guys have a reputation too. Like they want to be ethical, bad criminal hackers, right?
I just recently got into an argument with a bad guy about they sent a weaponized proof of life. So proof of life is where we send them a couple of encrypted files. They send those files back to us unencrypted to show that they can do it, right? Yeah. Before we go buy the whole thing and pay tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars for it. And when they sent one of the files back, it had some malware in it. And that is unusual.
Tricky.
Yeah. And so
I thought you wouldn't notice and you caught it.
Yeah.
Get him, Kurtis.
Yeah. We don't just take whatever files they send us and like throw them on the machines. We test that stuff before we.
I mean, obviously when you say it, but like if you're not in the world, I would be like, oh, they sent it back. Let's open it. You know, like you make it sound so obvious. Of course, you have to be careful. Of course, but if you're not in the world, right? I think I'd just be pumped that they send it back. Like, okay, it's working. Let's keep going.
Yeah, in this case, this topic of what we were just talking about, where I basically said, "Hey guys, I'm going to publicize this, and you're going to have issues getting ransom payments or any communication going forward. What are you doing, right?" And I gave them a hard time.
I love that story.
Yeah.
That's my favorite one today. Another person says, I struggle with how much to spend on securing our environment. Do you have any tips on navigating this? Honestly, you can go bankrupt trying to stay secure if you're a small company. Psh, solid question. From a Defendify perspective, that is who comes to us generally. Just someone who's trying to navigate and having all their tools in one spot. But what's your response? Like, how do folks decide where to put their spend and where to not?
Totally. I feel for this person because I believe that most, sort of medium-sized businesses, small and medium-sized businesses in the country are kind of what I would refer to as below the cyber poverty line. The tools that the companies are building, even if you can't afford them, you probably can't afford to operate them correctly. And that's not fair. Your opponent is a very well-organized, well-funded operation in Russia with no limits. And sometimes they have some nation state backed capabilities. I mean, you're basically fighting a foreign country as a small business. I don't think that's a fair fight.
And you're like a local bakery.
Yeah.
With like a credit card machine in my brain, that's like
it's crazy. And not to go on a tangent, but one of the things that I've been trying to do is affect policy around this at the federal level, because I don't think the way that it's being handled, frankly, it's just not being handled, but like the way that they're going about it right now is correct. And that's a whole nother discussion. But I really believe in managed service providers for most companies, even some of the larger companies, because there's an economies of scale with the talent, but there's a limit. First of all, there's a limit of the talent available to do this kind of work. And so an economies of scale at the managed service provider is going to get you someone who can operate the tool and make sure it's doing its job for you. Those organizations, because they have a sort of a picture of multiple enterprises of various sizes and styles and everything, they've got a pretty good idea of the minimum, let's call it the minimum viable defense strategy for those companies. And I think that's almost the only way you can handle it effectively. If you try to do it yourself, you're right, you're going to run out of money. You're not going to probably be able to attract or hire the talent you need to actually operate these things correctly. So, you just spent a bunch of money on a tool. If you don't use that tool 100% to its capacity, you wasted your money, and that's not easy to do for the average company. So I believe, pretty strongly in the managed service approach.
Yeah. And we actually have a slide that talks a little bit about that. And we have 2 more questions and we only have 5 minutes.
Okay.
I'm going to go to the slide first, and then Lila and Salma. Oh, the slide just popped up. Thank you to the back end, which is our lovely CMO, not on camera, but he's doing a great job. Thank you, Jim.
I'm sure he likes being referred to as the back end.
Oh yeah. I won't say that again. He has is he popped up the slide. Curtis, don't throw me off my game.
Sorry.
Okay, talk to me about ways to reduce ransomware risk with Ninja and Defendify. So one of the first things we want to do is reduce human-focused attacks. I don't know if you want to walk through this slide or if you want me to walk through this slide. You have a little more experience than me, so I'll pause for 1 second just in case there's anything you want to talk about on this slide, and I'm happy to pop in after the fact so I don't talk over you because you're the expert.
I mean, no. I mean, I think we've covered this pretty much in the talk. Yeah. I think anything in here that's talking about preparedness, that's we've really covered that. I think that's super important. And then one thing we didn't really talk about from a tool perspective is the EDR side of things. I think that's if you're not familiar with endpoint detection and response, I mean, to oversimplify what that is it's like the next generation of your antivirus. And when companies, the entire EDR market really emerged when incident responders would come into a company that had been hacked, and the only way they could triangulate and get rid of the bad guy's software effectively was EDR. And so they would install EDR and then they would manage it for the company, which became MDR, Managed Detection and Response. And now it's basically a bare minimum best practice for organizations.
We should send all of this information, which Defendify does on our end. If you're a Ninja customer, you're already getting the employee phishing simulation videos, which we love. You're already getting the videos to increase your cyber resilience. You're probably getting them monthly. That's when we get them. So I just assume that's for everybody. They're awesome. They're well animated. And Defendify has an opportunity to round out your cybersecurity with a series of tools that are under one platform that we're happy to send that your way so you can talk about it and think about it and sort of decide if anything is helpful for you in your small business and protecting your small business. So I will get back to the Q&As and just make sure that I have them all. I did have a question in the chat about how often AI is used in cyber criminal talks and ransomware. And my understanding is they're using it just like us, like we're trying to figure it out. They're figuring it out. Would that be the experience you're seeing?
Yeah. And they adopted it almost in the same way that we adopted it initially, which was synthetic content. So they're improving the phishing emails. The days of the poor spelling errors and things like that are gone. They're using to create the logos and the graphics, the fake landing web pages and things like that. So it's almost all like initial use of it was almost all content generation. We haven't seen them necessarily use it to create like polymorphic malware yet, although there's been proof of concepts done for this that show that that's entirely plausible and probably will happen. I will say that I think I ran into my first ransom case where the bad guys were using AI almost in an automated fashion to talk to me, which was very frustrating. We've seen it before where they've used it tactically, where suddenly their language would get really good and they start using big words that they didn't use before and things like that. I'm like, that's not the person I was just talking to. They clearly put that in ChatGPT. But now I think we've seen them even use like an API. And if you think, actually it makes sense because you think about they're a business, they're trying to operate efficiently. That particular ransomware group was getting about 40 to 50 new victims a day. So if they had humans sitting at the keyboard talking to all these people, it would be untenable for them. And so it makes sense. It's just very frustrating for us. In one of these cases, I think I will probably send them a block of Unicode or something to get it to prove that it's AI. But I have to get the customer's permission before I do that.
Do the customers generally understand the tech on the, I want to say back end again. Do the customers generally understand how AI can be used and do they have the technical experience to really understand what's happening in those scenarios, or do you have to provide sort of an education component while you're
Definitely the second one. Definitely the second one. But they understand what AI is. They just don't understand how the bad guys are using it in an automated way. And that's really inconsequential to them. But the point is I'm not talking to a person. I'm talking to a robot, and that changes the dynamic of the negotiation. And yeah, it's tough.
So if you're part of our community right now and you're saying, man, I do not know every single aspect of the tech, please don't feel shamed. It sounds like that's pretty common, and that's why we're all here.
Yep.
And that's kind of a wholesome message to end on. Are there any last words or any last pieces of advice you'd love to give to this community? And I think Jim is popping up maybe to say hello, or maybe it's a mistake. I'm not sure.
The books. We need to wrap off the books.
Oh, are we not emailing them after the fact? Do you want me to say their names, or would you like me to
just, if anyone wants to be in consideration, they need to put their name in the chat.
Okay, just another reminder, if you haven't already, if you are interested in one of our 20 Kurtis Minder books, that is an awesome read. And I say that not because he's here. You can block your ears. I've said it privately and publicly. I loved the book. I loved the book. It was an easy, I even read it on my non-work time. I loved it. It was so good. I've said it to you a million times, but for folks, if you want to be part of the raffle, do some commenting, even an emoji in the chat, and that'll give me a heads up that you're interested. And I will be emailing you in the next 24 hours asking for a mailing address. I'm a real person, Ashley McCurry, real name, so it'll come from me, amccurry@defendify.com. So just making sure, put that in your spam filter so I can get through. Any last words or advice? Oh, I got 14 new messages, but I think that's all.
Book, please. Book, please.
While I look at those chats, you can give us any parting advice you feel is relevant to the experience that you bring to this group.
I would just say, there's a chapter in the book that says you don't have to be a doctor to know how not to die. That's the name of the chapter. And I think, what I'm trying to say there is there are just some very basic things that we can do as individuals and or organizations, both, that significantly reduce the risk of cyber attacks. And so we talked about some of those today, like MFA and good credential policy. But also just as simple as updating your software when your software vendor, your phone tells you it needs to do an update, do that as soon as you can. When your browser says it needs an update, do that as soon as you can. Those software companies have made mistakes that they're now fixing for you. And the longer you wait to do those updates, the more likely these guys are going to get through. So there's just some basic stuff that I think we can all do. And I do think that, even though I think a lot of organizations, small organizations, and people tell themselves like, hey, look, my data is not that important. I'm not that important. The fact is we are all connected. And I do this one talk called the digital butterfly effect, which is a play off the chaos theory of the butterfly effect. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but yeah. So the concept is in that concept, I could directly connect a cyber incident at a dry cleaner to a national security concern. And so what I'm saying is we all have a role to play. Just do the basics. You don't have to be a cyber expert to do those basics. And I think everybody will be better off.
Thank you so much for your time, both on behalf of myself, the whole Defendify, and Ninjio community. I really appreciate it. And I can't wait to follow up and ask you more gossip in email, anything we couldn't joke about here online. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Come to Maine soon, and we'll see you again soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kurtis. Bye, everyone. Have a great day.